My name's Dan Gilday, and I'm a parent. I have kids at School 23 and at Wilson.
Mary, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Mary Callahan. My son goes to World of Inquiry. He's in 3rd grade, and I'm a teacher in Greece. And I'm also on the Citizen Action Education Committee. So I'm really I feel like I've been out of the loop because crazy pandemic teaching. And I just want to know, I want to keep up with what's going on. And especially, this is very alarming. And I just kind of want to get my head wrapped around what's going on. So I'm really here just to kind of take in a lot of information today. So thank you.
Glad you're here.
Jonathan, we just wanted to take this opportunity since we had a few minutes just to introduce ourselves because some of us have never met each other. So I see he's connecting.
And this is Dr. Tao, my professor from NAS. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Dr. Shaugi Tel, School of Education, Nazareth College. Been there, I think, 22 years now. And been researching charter schools for a really, really long time. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here.
I want to say, Kristen, did you go to Nazareth?
I did the speech pathology program there as a grad student.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Your name sounds familiar.
They were just whispering all the wonderful things about staff areas, I'm sure.
Tracy Farmer is another name I recognize.
Yes.
Hi,
Tracy, good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
We're just doing quick intros. Tracy, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Shaggy, I saw you speak, oh my God, maybe 100 years ago. I think you were at RIT. The auditorium was full. It was full. And here we are. Okay, here we are. So I guess why I'm here is I'm looking for what's gotten better, what's gotten worse, what stayed the same, and I'm sure that's what you're going to address. And I will, my connection is unstable, so I'm keeping myself off of video.
All right.
Sounds
No
good.
problem.
And we're just like trickling in here. So if anybody wants to jump in and introduce themselves, we're happy to say hi to you.
Yes. Good morning,
But
Amy and
no
Jean.
pressure.
Denise.
Good morning. How are you?
Hey, Amy.
Good morning.
Hi.
Amy, you want to introduce
Good to see
yourself?
Hi. I am an art teacher in the city school district at school 16. And so I'm in Roar also. And so I'm just really grateful that you could come and speak with us today. Thank you.
Great. All right.
I think Jeannie was trying to talk.
Oh yeah, just recent retiree, retired last month from RCSD. And Dr. Tell, I have to tell you, I took your class, oh gosh, maybe 19 years ago. And it was one of the best I ever took at Nazareth.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
No,
Thank
really,
so
you
much.
helped me grow and see things through a different perspective. So thank you so much.
I'm humbled. I'm so humbled. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations on your retirement, Jeannie.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. I turned my video on, but I'm like in pajamas, hair's bedhead.
No pressure.
Oh my goodness. All right. There's Dave. I know Dave too. Yeah.
It's like a mini reunion here.
It is. It is.
I love it. I kind
morning,
of like
Dave.
that about Zoom, that we can all say hi to each other and some of us can still be in our pajamas. All right, it's 9:59, so we're almost approaching official start time. And if anybody, Dave, you want to introduce yourself and say hi?
I am Dave Sutlefadius, and that's me.
Oh, that's not
Hi.
just you. As people come in, you can just write your name and your role in the community in the chat. I was trying to think of one of those, like one adjective to describe how you feel today, but I didn't. I wasn't feeling inspired by that. Oh. Hey, Carrie.
Here's everyone.
I know, it's exciting.
Yeah. This is very similar to like how it is in the morning, like logging in with our students. We're like, all right, come on in. You're like texting the parents. You're like, all right, got another. I win.
It's the doorbell sound. It becomes very exciting. Hi, everybody. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be awesome. You can write your name and your role in the community and anything else you want to say. And we are recording today so that we can share for those of us who couldn't make it. Yeah, Dave, that would be great. You can put it on YouTube later. And then we can count how many likes and views we have. And usually we give it like 5 minutes to let everybody come. And then we get started. So I'll wait till 10:05 officially. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Jamila.
I'm loving looking at the chat and seeing all the variety. And
I know, and now that I know Jamila is a SL teacher at an elementary,
watch out, Jamila.
I might need to pick her brain about some things. Hi, Megan.
Hi, good morning.
How are you?
Good, thanks for organizing this.
Absolutely. We're just introducing ourselves in the chat box.
Okay.
I'm waiting until 10:05 to get started.
And Megan, you probably can't see because you just, entered, so you probably can't see the rest of us. But there's quite a variety in the room as far as like grade levels and schools and a couple parents here. Just to kind of let you know.
Hmm?
Dave, how are you?
I'm all right, getting by. How about you? I haven't been to too many of Dan's meetings, so I haven't really been
All right.
my toe into that very much, but
That's all right. That's all right.
rambling along.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting being 10 o'clock on a Sunday. Usually it's 8:30 on a Sunday night or Thursday.
It feels a little early, actually.
I know, and I voted for this.
Same.
Actually, it's good. We got it organized quickly.
Yeah,
That
no,
is for
and thank
sure.
you so much. That was amazing. Everybody rose to the occasion.
Yeah, it's a timely issue. Yeah.
All All right, I saw another person just joined us, so we're just, oh, let me go back here. We're just writing our name and our role in the community in the chat while we wait for everybody to join us.
Delina.
Hey. This is great. We've got a really good group here. All right,
I did post on Facebook as a reminder, so some people might be like, oh
yeah, that's
I
fine.
forgot I wanted to do this. So I'll let people in if you want to start the show here.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea. So as people come in, we can just write our names and continue introducing ourselves in the chat. I'm going to start with a quick 2-minute video. And then, we'll get into these slides a little bit about the Rochester City School District specifically. And we have a couple speakers, and then we will let Dr. Tell take it away for a while, and we will end with questions and answers. And there is a really quick action piece at the end. So I hope everybody stays for the full time we have together. So here we go. I'm going to get started with this.
You know what a charter school is, right? The school that we, the public, pay for, but that is privately managed with little oversight or regulation. If that doesn't bother you, consider this. Charter school advocates claim they make public schools stronger, but as more charter schools open nationwide, they're actually draining money from already underfunded school districts, leaving public school students with less. Let me explain. Communities don't build new public schools unless they need more classrooms, but in many states, parents and school boards have little say over whether a new charter school can open in their community. When a charter school opens that isn't needed, the community ends up with more schools for the same number of students, forcing the district to spend more on buildings and administration rather than students and teachers. And there's more. When a student leaves to attend a charter school, the public money we spend to educate them, let's say $10,000 a year, follows. But the student's old public school can't reduce its cost by $10,000. It can't spend less for AC or heat. Its principal can't work part-time. It can't pay a teacher less because she has one less student. So what happens instead? The school has to cut arts and music classes, lay off its librarian or nurse, clean its bathrooms less, or pay teachers so little they need another job to support their families. A first-of-its-kind study of 3 California school districts found that on average, charter schools are taking over $1,000 a year from the education of each student that attends a neighborhood school. Charter schools cost Oakland's district over $50 million during the 2016 and 17 school year alone. With that money, Oakland could shrink its elementary classrooms to a max of 18 students and double its nurses and counselors, and still have $10 million left every year for other needs. The same thing is happening in San Diego and other school districts across California and the nation. Public schools are already struggling with too few resources as it is. Allowing charter schools to open without giving communities a say in the matter is making things worse.
Okay. Kristen. I'll hand it over to you.
All right, so we have some slides, and the first part does talk about the financial part of it. So for the 2019-2020 school year, RCSD budgeted $91 million to pay for the students that are in charter schools. And right now there are a total of 14 charter schools in Monroe County. 11 of them are in Rochester, 3 are in Greece, and 3 more were slated to open for 2020. And like I said, all of the charter schools in Monroe County are in Rochester, and then the 3 in Greece. And this quote is from an article in February of 2019. And if charter schools are open to expand in urban districts without consideration of their impact on public schools, then we'll see more instances of urban school systems pressed to the breaking point. And this article was referring to Boston at one point and talking about how that while the city was growing academically, the actual school was not. So that we're seeing this across the country as well. So this is taken from the 2019-2020 school budget for RCSD. And in the budget, it breaks it down per school, how much we spend on students. And so at the bottom, lists each of the schools in the RCSD and how much is spent. All the way to the right is Rise School. And that school was under receivership and now is called Rise. And more funding was put into there to give them more resources so they can help improve their student performances. And that red line across shows how much we invest in charter schools, and which is 14,915. So that is, with the exception of Rise School, that is more than we invest in our students that are at RCSD schools.
Okay. I don't know if Megan is here. Megan was going to do these slides. So if she's not here, I can take it away. Some reporting was done last year analyzing in the state how many ELL students were admitted into charter schools versus the traditional public schools, how many students with disabilities were admitted into charter schools versus traditional public schools. And on all counts, the reporting showed that charter schools were taking less ELs, less special education students. And we also had some local reporting by Justin Murphy, and it showed essentially the exact same thing. So not only in the city, but this was also happening countywide, where families were moving to surrounding suburbs and were getting pushed back into the city by their local district, essentially saying, we don't have what you need here, but you could go back to RCSD and get the services that you need.
Claire, there's a chat, questions in the chat. I don't know if I can address it. It's Denise was asking, is that the figure currently for the 2020-21 school year?
And is that, Denise, did you mean the budget slide?
Yeah, I think
right, the 14, right, the 14,000.
I'm going to go back. This was from last year. And so that red line, actually the state determines how much money comes out of the local city school budget and goes for each student into a charter school. So last school year, this is the number the state mandated followed each student.
And then Denise also asked, what amount is sent to urban suburban districts per student? I'm assuming she's talking about the urban suburban program, maybe?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody else here does.
No, but I can try to look that up. I like that question, Denise.
Did I get the questions, Rebecca?
Yeah. Yep, that's it.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca for a moment.
So when I first started in the district, my first year I was laid off, and then I was recalled my second year, and I was placed in a department called the External Ed, which typically supplies special ed services. So that could be OT, PT, speech, resource room, consultant teacher, and the charter schools can request that from the district. So I was placed at a school that first opened that year. It was a middle school. They started out with a 7, 8, 9. And as I worked there, one of the secretaries said, oh, you work for the district, you would know what these codes mean. And so they were pulling for their enrollment for the next year. And so I was explaining to her what the special ed codes were. And any special ed kid, I witnessed her put them on a waiting list because they just felt they wanted to keep them. And then I had another student who was a special ed student who was a behavior problem. And I was in on a meeting where the principal at the time said, well, this isn't really a good fit for you. So what I want you to do is to go back to the district. We're not going to be able to accommodate your child here. And instead, you're going to tell the district that you just didn't have a good fit. Don't tell them anything about how your child has had a lot of behavior problems while here. And so that was two examples. And I was just really naive at the time. I was a second-year teacher. I was trying to keep, my head on, just kind of staying off everyone's radar. So those were just two examples that I saw where charter schools were basically discriminating against the special ed. And that's just in one school. So I can only imagine how many other schools are doing it.
Thank you, Chris or Rebecca. Okay, so Dan, I'm going to hand this slide over to you. Oh, you muted yourself. There you go.
Yeah, Genesee Community Charter School. So this year their charter was up for renewal, and the state only gave them a 3-year renewal instead of the regular 5-year renewal. And the reason is that they're not meeting the requirement to match the demographics of the district that they're in. And this letter on the slide is the letter from the GCCS administration responding to this. And if you, I guess, let's go halfway down. In the last few years, we have worked very hard to increase our efforts to attract a diverse population of students while still maintaining our mission to educate students from all backgrounds. This law was changed about 7 years ago, well after we had already been approved to be a diverse school reflecting Monroe County demographics. And the law saying that you have to reflect the demographics of the district was passed in 2010. So it was 10 years ago, not 7 years ago. But I want to point out that they say that they reflect the demographics of the county. That's not what the law requires, but it's also not true. It's not what they're actually doing. So I am going to show you the page from this is from the charter renewal report from the state ed district, the state ed department. And so it shows comparing to Monroe County and to RCSD. So ED is economically disadvantaged, so it's free and reduced lunch. GCCS has 36%, and Monroe County is 50%, and RCSD is 90%. And for English language learners, they have 1%. So again, they're not matching the county, and they're certainly not matching RCSD as they're required to by law. And students with disabilities, they have 11%, again, not matching the county and not matching RCSD as they're required to by law. So they're ignoring the law. And why is their free and reduced lunch so low? I think part of the reason is that they have a requirement that parents are required to volunteer 40 hours per year. But it's not really volunteering when it's required. So I would say this is tuition, actually. It's not volunteering. And, I don't know what's going to happen. So the state is trying to kind of push them to follow the law. I don't know if they're really actually going to pull the plug on them or not, and whether GCCS is going to respond to the message that they're getting, or whether they're just going to assume that the state's never going to really take the step of shutting them down. That's all.
Wow, thank you, Dan. And Rebecca's putting in the chat that Urban Choice was denied their renewal, but then they actually ended up getting renewed anyway. And I don't know if anybody knows specifics about that, but we're gonna hand it over to Dr. Tell now, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say.
All right. Hello, everyone. Very quickly, Dr. Tell, Nazareth College School of Education, been there 22 years, been researching charter schools for about 15 years. I'm very happy and humbled to be here. I think it's great that on a Sunday morning we have, 22 participants. I think it's a very good spirit. I think the sentiment of people to deal with this issue of school privatization, whether you're a teacher, a principal, a parent, a resident, is really, really critical. And this, I feel affirmed that everyone is here. And I know that each of you represents dozens and dozens of other people in the community. So quantity is important, but quality is important as well. I'm going to bounce around all over the place today instead of going through sort of a dry PowerPoint presentation, which I may pull up from time to time. But so there are several core, fundamental, just underlying core issues and principles that I think are important to stress and emphasize when it comes to the issue of privately operated contract schools. Charter means contract, contract means charter, and that's an incredibly important term because contract is central to market ideology. Contracts make markets possible, and charter schools are contract schools, whereas public schools are not contract schools. This is one of the reasons why public schools are agencies of the state. They are political subdivisions of the state. Charter schools are not political subdivisions of the state. Charter schools are not state agencies. They are not instrumentalities of the government. And so those points, those distinctions are very important from a legal, political, and other perspective. This is why charter schools are fundamentally a different type of animal from public schools. And even charter school proponents and supporters go out of their way to the idea that charter schools are free market schools. And when you connect the free market schools, contracts make markets possible. This is why you have charter schools opening and closing all the time, and it's considered normal. It's even considered healthy. And that when you talk about contract schools, what you're doing is you're eliminating human beings and citizens and basically transforming everyone into a consumer and a shopper. And so that the idea in the free market that the so-called parent so-called chooses the charter school, of course, it's really the other way around. And that if the charter school works out, great. If it doesn't work out, oh, well, you can't really seek redress anywhere. You can't go to court and say to a judge, the free market, screwed me over, because that's the way the free market works. And so it's really important to appreciate what a contract school is and what a charter school is, and that they are not public entities. They are not state agencies. And there have actually been several court rulings in New York State and many other states ruling why charter schools are not public schools and why they do not have to submit to and comply with many of the requirements that public schools do. And this is why, so for example, when folks cite the differences in English language learner enrollments and special education enrollments, I think the situation is actually worse than what the statistics show, because a lot of charter schools do not report things or do not report things comprehensively and accurately. They have a variety of ways of not reporting things. And so if you were to get a deeper, more accurate picture of what's going on, my guess is that the numbers would be starker and more troubling than they actually are. My position has always been that there's absolutely no justification for the existence, let alone expansion, of charter schools. What does that mean? It means that why are they here? Why do they even exist? What is the rationale for their existence? And if you're going to argue that charter schools exist because public schools are failing, but then you refuse to analyze why public schools are failing, and then you refuse to point out that the same people starting charter schools are the same people failing public schools through the operation of the state, then the situation becomes even more convoluted. And by the way, the irony of the situation is that thousands of charter schools are failing or performing very poorly. And by the count of many people, in the last 28, 29, 30 years, more than 3,000 charter schools have actually closed, oftentimes for poor academic performance, and more often than not for embezzlement, fraud, corruption, nepotism, patronage, lots and lots of racketeering and fraud. And yes, racketeering and fraud and corruption takes place in public schools, but the difference is pound for pound, the breadth and depth of corruption in the charter school sector far exceeds the breadth and depth of corruption, not just in public schools, but almost any other sector and sphere in society. And when you actually digest that, it's quite astounding. I can tell you that I'm pretty OCD about following charter school news, and I don't think I've seen 10 days go by where someone in a charter school hasn't been arrested. And I'm being kind there. And that's, remember, 7,500 charter schools, 100,000 public schools. And so do people get arrested in public schools? Sure. Does corruption take place in public schools? Yes, it does. But pound for pound, if you're going to compare apples to apples, there's literally no comparison. The piece about the corruption is because they are deregulated schools. They are free schools. They are independent, autonomous schools. They are, in a manner of speaking, do as you please schools. And so there's very little oversight of the schools. There's very little accountability of the schools. There's very little people breathing down their neck and making sure things are going right, which is why a lot of charter schools have 9 lives. And so they can get away with a lot of things. And when you have a lot of people who are connected to, a lot of lawyers and people like that who know how to move things around, even the Democrat and Chronicle, which is actually a big supporter of charter schools, has done very lengthy investigative reports showing how financial malfeasance takes place in local charter schools in Rochester. So even they've done these investigative reports, and Justin Murphy, who I've debated on radio several times, he's actually done quite a few investigative reports showing how charter schools move money around in very nefarious, not only nefarious ways, but they walk a fine line between legal and illegal. Certainly very unethical ways of doing things. So within that, I would also say, don't target parents, don't target students, and don't target teachers when it comes to the issue of charter schools. Parents are going to do what they think is best, right or wrong, informed or not informed. They're going to do what they think is best. Every parent wants what's best for their kid. That's fine, that's healthy, that's normal, even though the charter school really chooses them, not the other way around. And so my issue has always been, it's not about the motivations or the intentions of the parents and teachers and students, but rather, what do charter schools represent as an education arrangement in the United States? And just so analyze it from the perspective of political economy, meaning politics and economics, sociology, and theory. Why do we have them? Why do they actually exist? And this is tied to a much bigger analysis connected to neoliberalism and the neoliberal agenda of privatization, deregulation, and eliminating government responsibility for anything. And this started in the late 70s, early 80s, at home and abroad, where basically the social welfare state is dismantled piece by piece and everything is privatized, from education to healthcare to transportation to municipal services, parks, railroads, airports, everything is being privatized, even water is being privatized. And so charter schools are a textbook example of school privatization. And the reason this shift takes place in the 70s and 80s away from the welfare state, away from the Keynesian arrangements, away from the old arrangements to the new neoliberal arrangements, is because the inescapable rate of profit is a big problem for major owners of capital. And major owners of capital have to figure out, well, how do we maximize profit as fast as possible in the context of a continually failing economy? Well, you privatize, privatize, privatize. Well, so then what does that mean? It means that in the end, in the final analysis, charter schools are pay the rich schemes. Charter schools are one of many public-private partnerships, public-private arrangements, a form of privatization to use the state, to restructure the state by major owners of capital, millionaires and billionaires, to seize as much public money, public resources, public facilities, public assets, and public authority, to seize as much of that as possible, and then transfer that to rich individuals, rich organizations, and rich groups, but do it under the veneer of high ideals. We're here for the kids, we're here for the parents, we're solving problems, even though charter schools have a very high failure rate and close regularly and leave many minority families out in the cold, very angry and very abandoned. And so even by their own standards, charter schools do not actually measure up. And so I would encourage people there's nothing wrong with comparing standardized test scores in charter schools with standardized test scores in public schools. But in a way that misses the point, because really the main axis around which I think this should be viewed goes like this. Public and private are not only pronounced differently, they're not only spelled differently, they actually mean different things. And if you look it up in any dictionary, they will tell you that public and private are actually antonyms. They mean the complete and exact opposite of each other. This is why it's disingenuous to call privatized education arrangements public schools. Just because you're public in name doesn't mean you're public in reality. Just because you receive public money doesn't make you public. Just because you are ostensibly tuition free doesn't make you public. And so public means for everyone, for all, for the common good, inclusive, cheap, affordable, or free. Private means exclusive, not for everyone, not for the common good, just for some, and usually based on ability to pay. Just like Dan was saying, parents are, it's sort of a forced volunteerism where parents are required to do the work that normally professionals hired in public schools do the work, right? So it's very important to distinguish between public and private. And what the charter school folks usually do is they spend a lot of time blurring the distinction between public and private, which is a form of disinformation, which is a good way to really easily confuse people, because there's also a big attack on, no analysis, no thinking. And that's why everything is very coherent. And that's why everyone gets caught up in, well, charter schools perform better than public schools, therefore we should support them. Well, that's not really the argument. And factually, it's not even true, right? We all know that charter schools cherry pick their students. Charter school advocates in themselves actually admit this. If you want to actually find statements where they admit it, you can find them. And when you cherry pick your students, you can get any results you want, right? So it's very important to bear in mind that charter schools are not public schools, at least not in the way that public schools are public schools, and that courts have ruled that charter schools are not public schools. Yes, there are some conflicting court rulings that designate them as public, but I found the arguments there to be quite specious. I haven't found them to be very logically compelling. Argumentatively, they're pretty weak in my judgment. But in New York State, they have been ruled to not be public schools because they're really not. This is why they're not audited the same way as public schools are audited. And for the first, I want to say 7, maybe 9 years, no charter schools were audited in the state of New York, or pretty darn close to it. That's why they are deregulated schools, and deregulation is a feature of the neoliberal agenda that is wrecking the fabric of society at this time. So even in places like Ohio, this is from a few years ago, charter schools are exempt from more than 200 laws, rules, and regulations that public schools must uphold. That's a big difference, folks. For what it's worth, by the way, England has a version of charter schools called free schools, and Alberta, Canada has some version of charter schools. And I think New Zealand a few years ago scaled back their charter schools. And just very recently, this is something I'm going to have to look into, I heard that Brazil might be going down the path of charter schools. So very interesting developments taking place worldwide. No, but really the United States remains the epicenter of charter schools, which are basically pay-the-rich schemes masquerading as, you know, schools that empower parents, schools that increase educational freedom. And what happens is parents are actually reduced to participating in a lottery. Education is reduced to a gamble, right? In the wealthiest country in the world, which can provide fully funded, world-class, publicly controlled schools in every neighborhood, all of a sudden parents are reduced to hand-wringing and wondering if they're going to be chosen by a lottery to get into a school that may or may not be open 5 or 9 years later. Another thing to appreciate is that charter school teachers, I should say teachers, students, and principals in charter schools have a much higher turnover rate than teachers, students, and principals in public schools. It's significantly higher. And that's a direct result of the much different working conditions in charter schools compared to public schools. I'm not arguing that working conditions in public schools are paradise, but I am saying that the working conditions in charter schools are measurably and visibly not as good as the working conditions in public schools. So the turnover rate is very high. And when you have a very high turnover rate, you have a lot of instability. And that's just bad for everyone. You can't form community, you can't form collegial relations. Students see their teachers come and go. And of course, it's much harder to form a union when teachers are coming and going. You can't sustain any efforts needed to form a union, which is why 88 to 93% of the nation's 7,500 charter schools don't have any unions. And then when you do try to form a union, you can expect 9 out of 10 times very stiff, and let's be honest, very ugly resistance from the charter school operators. But it speaks to the tenacity and spirit of teachers who are so dedicated to teaching and students and the teaching and learning process that they'll put themselves through hell to form a union just to have some voice in the education of their students who they love, who they want to teach. And so maybe I can pause there for a second. So I don't think I've had that moment to breathe yet, but I'll stop there and invite any thoughts or questions and see how we can roll from there.
We have a few questions that I have saved, and
okay.
So I can read them to you, or I'm gonna actually, I can share my screen too, so everybody can. So the first one was, when you ask about why charters exist, I think the creators of those schools would have to address that. And aren't most created by former RCSD staff? Are they just doing it for the money?
Okay, so starting a charter school is very expensive, and sustaining and maintaining a charter school is even more expensive. That requires the kind of money that the average teacher, the average staff member simply does not have. What that means is that even if you are a teacher, active or retired teacher, or active retired principal, you are at some point or another going to have to connect with, team up with, partner with someone or some organization that does have the economic capital, the social capital, and the cultural capital to get the ball rolling, which is why today many, if not most, charter schools are run by nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations, charter school management organizations, education management organizations. So even though in the law in 44 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and Guam, anyone can theoretically start a charter school, the vast majority of charter schools are not started by some lone individual. Think about it this way. The original idea for one of the original ideas for charter schools is that teachers would start them and come up with maverick innovative programs to reach hard to reach students. Well, here we are nearly 30 years later, and fewer than 4%, I think it's 3%, fewer than 3% of charter schools in the United States are started, operated, or run by teachers, right? Most are run by individuals and groups with money or connections to money. So that's how that usually goes.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, and I think actually this is two questions. So how do we explain the quality of education and treatment of challenging students in public schools versus education and treatment of students in charter schools?
Okay, I might need some clarification on that, but maybe I can take a jab at this. One of the things to appreciate about public education in the United States is that most states every year cut funding for public schools. And we've seen that happen in New York State. We've seen that happen in many other states. And it's part of the neoliberal privatization agenda launched in the late 70s, early 80s, where funding is being cut and schools are being set up to fail and then demonized and then privatized. And so when you starve a school, of course things are going to go poorly, right? So if your home budget is $50,000 a year and I say to you next year it's only 20,000, you're going to be like, what the hell? You know, how am I supposed to, you know, figure stuff out? So when you starve schools, yes, they are going to fail. And then when they're deliberately and consciously set up to fail, of course, their education is going to suffer, class size is going to increase, teachers are going to be overwhelmed and overworked. And then on top of ridiculous high stakes testing requirements, it adds insult to injury. So yes, the quality there is going to suffer. And then it's not surprising that some parents, especially those targeted by charter school advertisers, are going to be lured into charter schools that overpromise and underdeliver, right? They're going to be told, oh, come to our school. But again, the reality is there that the performance of students in charter schools, if you want to go by that unsound criteria, is really not much better and oftentimes worse. I've even seen situations where supposedly some parents have been told that the charter school their kid is in is performing much worse than the public school they left, but supposedly they love their charter school, right? It makes no sense. It's one of these stories that doesn't even add up. So if a parent is taking their kid out of a public school and putting them in a charter school because they think the scores are going to be better there, keeping in mind that that's an unsound criteria for mismeasuring students, then a lot of times that is actually not going to happen. I've also heard the opposite, where parents in public schools will say, I love my failing school. I love my failing school. I'm not taking my kid out of my so-called failing public school for obvious reasons. And I'm not, you know, drinking the charter school Kool-Aid. And so even if you put your kid in a charter school, there's absolutely no guarantee that one, will stay in the charter school, and that two, that the performance in the charter school will be satisfactory. Right now, 150 to 200 charter schools close every year, and about 300 to 400 open every year. That's a high degree of instability. It's a high degree of closure. A lot of parents are left out in the cold.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next question, it says, what is being done in public schools to drive these RCSD teachers away?
So
maybe the person who wrote this question could speak up and maybe clarify for us.
I'll be happy to. My name is Jonathan Charlie. I am one of the parents that have been started in public schools. And as I was observing, I'm a very active parent. But as a very active parent, I saw a lot of challenging things when it comes to teacher communication, administration communication, and all of those things. And I'm sorry?
Sorry, someone was unmuted for a moment. You're good, Jonathan.
Okay.
Keep going, please.
All right, thank you. And then as a parent, that was challenging for me to experience. So I gave it time, 3 to 4 years. School 12 was first one. Wilson Foundation was the second one. And I had to have other options. So what is being said or what is being done when it comes to the quality of interaction, when it comes to the parents, when it comes to the RCSD schools, because we have to be able to trust the process, and the process is huge.
Okay, so I think I have a slightly better idea of what's being argued here. So what was it? Dyson 2020 was a teacher in the RCSD or was a parent, or I'm sorry about that. I'm still confused on that score.
Yes, I think parent.
Parent, okay, and he's saying that there's a lot of dysfunction in the school district, and supposedly as a result, many teachers are leaving. Is that
That was
right?
Jonathan. That was Jonathan speaking.
Okay.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. So I guess a couple of points. In urban school systems in the United States, there's always a lot of historical legacy dysfunction going on. It's incredibly difficult to manage a massive bureaucracy like an urban school system in Rochester, Buffalo, Yonkers, New York City, Chicago, and LA. And add to that there seems to be extra turmoil and extra tumult in the Rochester City School District. It's not a surprise that it leaves a bad taste in the mouths of many people. So we don't want to deny that there's dysfunction, that there's animosity and conflict, and things do happen. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that teacher turnover rate in charter schools is much, much higher. Now, urban school teacher turnover rates in the United States, way before charter schools existed, were hovering around 50%. And so that hasn't changed too much to the best of my knowledge. But I think it's almost like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire sometimes. And you can't seem to win. You lose here and you lose there. And as you've seen funding cuts take place, the teachers now become not just teachers, but they become counselors, social workers, nurses, parents, emotional therapists, and psychologists, and their workload is intensified, and their mental load and emotional load is intensified, and the burnout increases. And then coupled with the politics, especially when it's in the media all day and the district is being demonized nearly every day, you have a perfect storm of just stuff that makes you sick to your stomach. So I think it's a complex situation in that way. And I don't know that the Buffalo Public Schools are quite as quote unquote dysfunctional. It does seem like the RCSD has a contentious school board composition, and problems on the school board at the same time get magnified in the city newspaper and the Democrat and Chronicle as well. So I think there's a lot of moving parts to this question, and it might be useful to just sort of have a separate discussion on that. I'm not trying to dodge it because I don't want to deny it, but it might be useful to get a more granular approach to that and look at the nitty-gritty of what exactly is happening. So I hope that was somewhat helpful.
Yeah, so then thanks, Jonathan, for that question. The next question we have here is, we can't discount the reasons why parents seek out these opportunities for their children. What about the RCSD drives parents to subject themselves to this lottery or these lotteries for charter schools?
One of the reasons is that unlike public schools, charter schools have a large advertising and marketing budget, just like a private business. And so they are able to advertise to parents. And we know advertising can be very seductive and can be very convincing. And if you're trying to reach parents who are losing faith and losing hope in their district, it's not hard to see why parents might say, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's try this, because people really do believe in education. Even though ironically, the idea of education being the great equalizer is actually quite a myth. We have more people educated than ever today, but we also have more inequality and more poverty and more debt than ever before. And so it's if you go to an African American or Latinx parent in a public school system and you say, well, look, your mom and dad attended this failing school, you're attending this failing school, your kids are attending this failing school, how about you try this other school? Well, okay, they might say, yes, let's try this other school. Why not? Let's give it a shot. But the irony again is that a lot of those students end up being pushed out of the charter school and end up getting dumped back into the public school. And what I've found is that a lot of parents end up having a rude awakening in the charter school. And so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then there's this false dichotomy of failing urban public schools versus, questionable charter schools. When I think the issue is, why is the state abdicating its responsibility to fully fund public schools that are world-class, publicly controlled, and available in every neighborhood so that no parent should have to be turned into a consumer to shop for a school that may or may not even work, right? It's a false choice. It's a false choice. It's like saying, if so-and-so wins the election, I'm leaving the country and never coming back. Well, why don't you just stay and fight, right? You just stay and fight for a better future and for a better country. And I think we have to defend public education. We have to defend the public interest, and we have to demand full funding for public schools so that we don't see our schools set up to fail through funding starvation. If you're going to keep cutting funding for schools, of course they're going to perform poorly, and of course dysfunction is going to set in. And all of a sudden, teachers who are already collegial and getting along, half of them are lost, and then the remaining teachers develop animosity and infighting amongst each other. And it doesn't help if the DNC and city newspaper magnify these problems in the district, creating antisocial public opinion to sway opinion in one way or another. So there's an intense web of disinformation that's taking place, and you can't blame parents for wanting to they will subject themselves to a lottery. They will. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the lottery is set up so that there's a waiting list, a first tier waiting list, a second tier waiting list, and a third tier waiting list, because the charter school folks know that a lot of the students they do admit are not going to stay in the school. And so then they have a pipeline of students waiting. And again, this speaks to the instability and turnover in charter schools. Maybe we should say to the parents, do you want to send your kid to a school where the school may close a few years later, where many of their peers disappear every few years, their teachers and principals disappear every few years, where the test scores, if you even accept that as a legitimate measurement of performance, are not that impressive to begin with? At the same time, can you find a charter school where stuff is going well? Yes, you can, but that's not the pattern. You can always find exceptions, but it's not actually the pattern. And again, I think it's a false choice. I think we need to say education is a public social responsibility. It is a human right. Why is the state abdicating its responsibility to fund public schools fully? And why is the state not being held accountable for its massive deficits and its massive budget shortfalls and its socially irresponsible conduct?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take the next one. It's more of a statement. The next one, I believe Megan had made it. It says, I think it's really interesting that the growth of charter schools aligns with the beginning of the managed school choice policy in the RCSD.
I guess I do know a little bit about the managed school choice policy in the RCSD. The thing I would emphasize about choice is that charter school promoters will say, well, shouldn't parents have choices? Shouldn't parents have the power to choose where to send their kids? And it is hard to argue against that argument. It's like saying, and I'm not trying to be facetious, like, shouldn't I be able to choose between a Snickers bar versus a Twix bar? Shouldn't I be able to choose between a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic? Who really thinks that people should have no choices in life? Right? And so what happens here is that two different notions of choice get mixed up and confounded, the same way that public and private get mixed up and confounded and create many problems. There's choice in the abstract, which means that you should be able to select something from a list of alternatives, and everyone should have the right to select something from a list of alternatives. Fine. But what choice means in the charter school discourse, what choice means in the current neoliberal context is choice in the free market ideology, choice in the consumerist sense. And what that means is that the parent is no longer a human being or a citizen with the rights associated with a human being or a citizen, but now they are a consumer shopping for a charter school the same way they're shopping for a car. And so charter school advocates like to mix up those two choices, and they would like people to believe that what they're talking about is not the free market, narrow consumerist sense of choice, but this abstract notion of choice that everyone likes and goes along with, right? So we should all have choices. I don't want anyone telling me you can only eat Snickers bars, or I don't want anyone telling me you can only wear these sneakers for 11 years, right? We should be able to have choices, but that's not what they mean by choice. They mean a narrow consumerist free market individualism sense of choice. What that means is now every parent has to fend for themselves when it comes to finding a good education. If you're able to find a good education, God bless you. And if you're not, oh well, keep shopping for a school.
Yeah, I just to speak to that, and I don't know the other educators on here and parents, but I think what's happening in our district is for the last almost 20 years, that's what our district has been doing. They want us to shop around for schools. The RCSD is also doing damage by saying we have a school choice event every January. Come and shop for your school in the RCSD, and you enter a lottery, which looks a lot like what the charter schools are doing. So I think that there is this misunderstanding about, I think most parents and the average citizen doesn't understand the managed school choice policy, and they don't understand charter schools.
No,
I think that the district really has to take responsibility and change the way that they are talking about school choice. And I know that the new superintendent is looking at going back to scaling back the managed school choice policy. So I do think the district holds a lot of responsibility in this problem. I think the average parent doesn't know the difference between charters and the RCSD, and it's chaos.
Megan, that's such a good point. And I also think, and something that helped me kind of wrap my head around all of this was when we look at the system the way it is, and we look at the decisions that the district makes, and these, and essentially everything working together in coordination to help send people to charter schools, but also to elevate charter schools in the minds of many of our community members, it makes more sense to me that this is really a systemic sabotage of the public schools, not an accidental situation where, why would the district offer those type of events unless they were trying to equate charter schools with public schools, right? That kind of misinformation and confusion actually serves the charter school system. And so when I begin to think of it like that, it starts to make more sense, right? This is a coordinated effort to sabotage our public schools so that special interests can make money off of our public tax dollars, right? As opposed to like a series of very confusing coincidences that end up making our public schools suffer. I don't know what question we are on, Kristen.
Yeah, the next one is, if charter schools are receiving the same public money as public schools, how is it that they are allowed to be audited differently?
Okay, so these 2 points I think need to be separated. So for example, charter schools are actually not receiving the same public money as public schools. So let's just deal with that for a second. When a student, and this depends on the jurisdiction and the state, it is a little bit different. the region. When a student leaves a public school and goes to a charter school, most of the federal and most of the state money follows the student to that school. I would say between 65 to 90% of that money follows the student to that school. That was why that movie was called Backpack Full of Cash, right? And that's loaded with a lot of confused ideas as well, by the way. And so charter schools don't actually receive the same money as public schools when a student leaves a public school. This is why charter school advocates will frequently say, we are getting shortchanged. We are not getting as much money as public schools. We are doing more with less, and this is really unfair. But the reality is that the law is set up where they don't get capital funding because they are different entities, legally speaking, than public schools. And very important, they provide far fewer services and far fewer resources than public schools. And so if they were, especially for-profit schools, even though nonprofit is very like a for-profit school, they're very determined to engage in cost cutting and revenue maximizing. And so they have an incentive to offer fewer services, pay teachers less, offer fewer dining services, fewer nurses, fewer sports programs, because that's costly, right? And so they actually provide fewer services, and at the same time they enter into partnerships with host school districts so that the host school district provides special education services instead of the charter school, which is a way of what some people call freeloading off the public school system. At the same time, billionaires like Bill Gates, Eli Broad, Sam Walton, Michael Dell, Mark Zuckerberg, and dozens of others, sports celebrities, movie stars, philanthropic organizations, Goldman Sachs, many Wall Street hedge fund managers pour millions and millions of dollars into charter schools that no one really talks about. The second piece is actually different from the money piece. How is it that they are allowed to be audited differently? They're allowed to be audited differently precisely because they are not public schools, properly speaking. They are private entities. They are not agencies of the state. They are not political subdivisions of the state. And people like Eva Moskowitz, head of the Success Academy, and other charter schools have actually successfully argued in the courts that, how dare the state try to audit them, because they're not a public school. They are a deregulated school that can do as it pleases. And the court said, yeah, you're right. So they do not get audited in the same way because they are not public schools in the proper sense of the word.
Did we get to both parts of that question? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So the next one we have here on the list is, how are they able to take money away from public schools and not serve students reflective of that district?
So it's the same thing like Dan spoke to at the beginning about why the Genesee Community Charter School does not have a student profile or composition that reflects the student profile in the surrounding areas. Charter schools cherry pick their students in a variety of ways. They engage in selective enrollment practices, and the United States Office of Civil Rights has filed lawsuits against many charter schools for engaging in discriminatory enrollment practices. The other thing is that the states will take a very soft approach towards charter schools and say, at least try to make a good faith effort to have a student profile that at least kind of looks like the student profile in the surrounding area. And, a charter school could ostensibly show good faith efforts and say, hey, we really tried, but it really didn't work. And then the state can say, okay, well, you tried, here's some brownie points, and your charter gets renewed anyway. So I think Dan is right that the charter, meaning contract for GCC, probably will be extended again, which goes back to the theory that charter schools have 9 lives. And so this is why they're able to get away with not servicing the same type of student. And it isn't just ELLs and special ed students that are underrepresented. Homeless students are also underrepresented in charter schools. poor test takers are often underrepresented, and behavior problem students, so-called behavior problem students, are also underrepresented in charter schools. In 2013, charter school researcher Kevin Wellner came out with an article called The Dirty Dozen, and is basically 12 ways that charter schools engage in discriminatory enrollment practices and do so with impunity.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, are there any local or national numbers that reflect the numbers of students who charters involuntarily?
That's a great question. I am not aware of any, and that would be amazing to have. I think the best way I have found to figure out who's leaving charter schools and going back to public schools is talking either to the principal or superintendent of that school, or the main accountant in that school, the main financial person in that school who keeps tabs on per pupil funding. Those are the three main individuals in the school who would know that information. I will say that we are told frequently that one of the reasons we need more charter schools is because there are waiting lists for charter schools, and that supposedly proves that we need more charter schools. But a lot of times what's been discovered is that those waiting lists are significantly inflated and unreliable.
Okay, the next question here is, can we touch on the fact that we have a board member that openly and vocally supports charter schools? We have a newly appointed superintendent that is hiring charter school affiliates, and the chairman of the board is pushing for the appointment of the CEO of a charter school.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of school leaders these days are imbued with neoliberal thinking. A lot of school leaders these days have adopted neoliberal ideology and the ideology of privatization. And you also have a lot of school leaders these days who are sponsored, funded, supported, pick your favorite adjective, by millionaires and billionaires that are pushing these kinds of privatized arrangements. So for example, Jean-Claude Brizard was the former superintendent of the RCSD, and he was one of many urban school superintendents who went through the Broad Academy for superintendents. And the Broad Academy is set up by billionaire Eli Broad, who trains certain individuals, mostly African-American individuals, to take over as CEOs and superintendents of large urban school districts to push for privatization of the school district, receivership, mayoral control, and charter schools. So it's not surprising that you have a lot of people who are suddenly appearing in school leadership positions who have a neoliberal outlook and a neoliberal aim for a lot of these things. This is exactly what happened with the push for mayoral control and state control of the RCSD less than years ago and 10 years ago. You have these very neoliberal individuals who are neoliberal restructurers of public school systems that want to sort of inch their way into the leadership of the schools so as to step by step privatize the school system. And you also have a lot of people who spend an enormous amount of money trying to buy school board seats so as to push a pro-charter, pro-privatization agenda.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so the next question here is about urban suburban. And the person says, I know that some of these districts like Pittsford balance their budget based on the funding they get for RCSD students who are enrolled in urban suburban. Are there the same concerns for that program hurting the district?
Honestly, I don't know enough details about the urban suburban program to speak to it in a good way. But I can say that anywhere charter schools pop up, it's really bad news for the public school system, which is attended mainly by minority students. And that charter schools actually intensify segregation. They don't reduce segregation. And so I think I had in the chat earlier, I had said that you know, here in Rochester, you have 14, some people say 20 charter schools that are siphoning nearly $19 million away from the RCSD. Well, in Buffalo, they're siphoning, if you do the math, about $155 million a year from the Buffalo public school system, which is chronically underfunded and overtested anyway. So now you have two competing systems that makes everyone a loser, right? You have a redundant system. You have two failing arrangements. That's what you have now. Instead of one failing and one supposedly successful, now you have two failing arrangements, two troubled arrangements, competing for the same students and for the same money, creating redundant programs, when we know if everything were actually consolidated and run properly, it would be much better for the students and the teachers.
Could I add something about urban suburban?
Go ahead, Dan.
So, I mean, I think the answer is yes, there's a concern about the budget impact of that, but urban suburban is different from charters in that the suburban principals are allowed to explicitly select which students they want. So charters kind of do that they're by kicking students out after they get there. They're not supposed to do that, but they do it anyway. But in the case of urban suburban, they're actually allowed to select the students to begin with. So I think there's also a concern with them skimming the top performing students out of the district, and that's probably even bigger issue than the budget issue.
Okay, the next question is, how does money move from the charter to the district when they are required to report about every other month? Is there a formula? Can public schools accept financial gifts in the same way that charter schools can?
So in many situations, it is set up so that when a student is pushed out, counseled out, leaked from a charter school back into the public school, the charter school keeps a portion or the entire amount of the money. That's a problem. I know several years ago here where I live in Lackawanna, we have the Lackawanna School District, and then we have the Global Concepts Charter School. And this question was a question I had, and I went and spoke directly with the accountant in the Lackawanna School District. And he said for a long time, what the charter school, local charter school would do is they would admit students, take the money, kick them out at a strategic time, and keep the money. And I said, well, how did you guys deal with that? And he gave me a very interesting, clever answer. He said that we started to parcel out the money to the charter school. In other words, here's the money for the first 3 months. If you keep the student, you get the money for the next 3 months. If you keep the student, you get the money for the next 3 months after that. And that way, that reined in the ability of the charter school to, eject the students and keep the money. And so the other side of it is a lot of charter schools will close, but they will not return their inventory to the public school system. This is why in a lot of Florida charter schools, laptops disappear, tables and chairs disappear, furniture disappears, expensive equipment disappears. And in many cases, charter schools are either not required or are required, but do not keep an inventory of a long list of really, really expensive publicly funded materials, right? So there's this sort of legalized theft going on at many, many different levels by charter school operators.
Yeah.
The second part of the question was that are public schools allowed to take gifts in the same capacity as charters?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I could be wrong, but I think if someone wants to come along and say, here, I'm donating, let's say, $50,000 for this program because I really believe in it, there may be a way to legitimize that and to legalize that. But honestly, I'm not going to try and bluff my answer to that. I just don't know.
And this is actually a question from me, and it's of course slightly leading, but I'm wondering what you know about charter school employees being ununionized, and
Oh,
perhaps what the implications of that are.
Rod Watson is one of the newspaper writers / editors in the Buffalo News in Buffalo, New York. And years ago, he came up with a colorful phrase to describe the relationship between charter schools and unions. And let me see if I can remember it. I think it was unions are to charter schools what the crucifix is to Dracula. And basically, nearly every charter school promoter and supporter I've met or read about is very anti-union, is very, very anti-union. Unions are seen as forces and entities that promote regulation. Charter schools are entities that are deregulated, and that the unions are seen as bad and evil, and that eliminating the unions is seen as the prerequisite for establishing academic and operational and administrative success. So unions bad, they're undermine the free market. They are a form of barriers, regulations. They're a form of block to free, independent, autonomous charter schools, and that's why they should be eliminated. And hey, once we eliminate the unions, just watch, we'll deliver the results. Well, that hasn't happened. And this is why, actually, despite the intense opposition to unions in charter schools, a lot of bold charter school teachers nonetheless take up the fight to unionize their charter schools. The other side of it is that because 90% of charter schools have no unions, teachers in charter schools are at-will employees, just like at Xerox, just like at Motorola, just like at, any big corporation. They are at-will employees. They do not have the security and the legal rights that teachers in public schools and teacher unions provide. So this is why their employment status is often more precarious and anxious in a charter school than it is in a public school. It's also the reason why quite a few charter schools either have no retirement or pension plans, or they have weak or diluted retirement and pension plans. You have to remember that according to the United States Department of Education, at least a couple of years ago, charter school teachers on average make $9,500 a year less than their counterparts in the public schools. And so it's not unusual for a teacher to work in a charter school, but have the aim of eventually leaving the charter school to transition to a public school where working conditions, benefits, compensation is generally higher, even in the context of public schools being assaulted and underfunded.
Thank you so much. Okay, it's 11:20, just about, and I'd say we have about 10 more minutes of questions. And Megan just put something in the chat that I'm wondering if she would share with all of us.
Sure. I thought I shared it with everybody. Did I
You
not?
did. I just think it would be helpful if you spoke more.
Oh, yeah, sure. So
questions.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote the chief financial officer an email, and I just asked her about the effect that the charter schools are having on our budget crisis. I just wanted to hear what she said. And so I put it in the chat, and she definitely, came across as feeling like the charter schools are good for us. They're competition. And so if we can just get our act together in the RCSD and compete, then those parents would just come on back to the RCSD. But she, brings up the point that as we've lost students to charter schools, we have not changed the number of staff that we have hired. So that's one of the reasons for the the increase in all the staff reductions this past year. So I definitely got a vibe from that she was kind of, not seeing what the damage that was happening to our district from that email.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, please.
I think, so let's go back to this idea of the ideology of the free market and individualism and consumerism, eliminating human beings and human rights, eliminating citizens and citizen rights. And all of a sudden, education is about, you are a parent, you have to fend for yourself. Good luck, you're on your own. Survival of the fittest. Good luck in the law of the jungle if you find a good school. And the ideology of competition, and charter school supporters, I'll give them this, they celebrate and embrace the ideology of competition because they think what works in business, which it really doesn't, will supposedly work in a social responsibility and a public responsibility like education and healthcare. And competition means I can win if and only if you lose. That's what competition means. Competition means that you have an adversarial relationship. And that competition really in practice, at the end of the day, makes everyone a loser. So we have to go back to this idea. Do we view education as a right and a social responsibility that government should guarantee in practice? Or do we think it is a business and should be subjected to the law of the jungle? Now, if you think it should be subjected to survival of the fittest and dog eat dog and might makes right, then yes, you should support charter schools. And there, 200 charter schools close every year, leaving parents, African-American parents, minority parents out in the cold, abandoned and angry. If you think that's desirable, then yes, you should support charter schools. But if you think education, healthcare, garbage collection, transportation, food, shelter, and clothing should be provided with a guarantee at a basic minimum in the 21st century where there's an abundance of wealth in the society, and that government should actually take up its responsibility to its citizens and not abdicate it, as neoliberalism says, then you should support the public interest and public schools and keep the distinction between public and private separate. It's also not an accident that, what do they say, 70, 80% of businesses fail in the first year. Why is that good? How is that positive? How is that really healthy and affirming? So again, we have to pose the question, do we want public social responsibilities and human rights to be treated as commodities? Is education a commodity? Should education be bought and sold? I've heard charter school supporters say that if a charter school is failing, I found this very interesting statement, not only should it be closed, but it should be ruthlessly closed. I'm not sure why it has to be ruthless, but it should be ruthlessly closed. But it actually makes sense because just like a shoe store at the mall, if the shoe store is not performing, then it should be closed. And then the door should be open to another entrepreneur coming in and taking a jab at it. And if they succeed, God bless them. And if they don't succeed, let the market fail them. Dog eat dog, survival of the fittest. Do we want that in education or not?
Yeah, and the difference there is we're talking about children and not shoes, right? And that's like the heartbreaking reality is, we're forgetting that these kids are only kids one time. I think often people who have chosen charter schools for many of the reasons we've talked about today feel personally attacked when we critique the system at large. And it's really important to remember that no child's school should be closed ruthlessly or otherwise at any point in their education. And we saw last year here in the RCSD, they just closed 4 schools I personally was at a school of, 5 years ago that they decided to close. It was extremely traumatic, not only for the children who were currently attending that school, and we had to witness this like decline throughout the year with a very, very sad, heartbreaking end of school day. But also as a community, it's a loss that never returns, because once that school is gone, you've lost that connection to your neighborhood, right? Like we have people at some of our schools here in the RCSD that have been open for 100+ years. We still have alumni come back to say hi. It's been 50 years since they've been in the school and they still come back. But when you lose that school, you lose that connection forever. So I think it's important to remember that no one wants any child's school to close. And the charter schools that are open now, in my opinion, should always remain open also, because there are children there who need an education, and that's where they happen to be. Maybe Dr. Tell, you can talk about what like a moratorium on charter schools means as a possible option.
That's a great idea, and a lot of people have actually supported this idea of a moratorium on charter schools. Moratorium simply means freeze, just stop. If you're planning 10 more charter schools next year, don't, just stop, freeze it, don't do it. And the place where this controversy came up most sharply was less than 2 years ago in California. And why? Because California is the state with the most charter schools, with 1,300 charter schools in it. And it passed its charter school law in 1992, which was more than 25 years ago. And so the folks in the Los Angeles area have a lot of experience fighting and combating charter schools. And what they were able to do with and without Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who sort of rode the fence on this, is they were able to rein in and scale back a lot of the privileges and a lot of the advantages charter school operators had in California. And one of those was that it became harder for charter schools to be approved so easily in California, and that they had to go through a few more hurdles and a few different authorities to be approved. And then in some places, the number of charter schools allowed to be open has been restricted. And then in some places, the enrollment cap has been reduced. So some states do have a limit on how many charter schools you can establish. Others have no limits on the number of charter schools you can establish. New York State has raised its cap on charter schools, I want to say 3 times. It has most recently limited the ability of New York City to increase charter schools, mainly because the Senate and legislature is predominantly Democrat.
All right, so it's 11:26. So let's maybe call for last comments and questions, and then we're gonna move towards like a quick action section.
I think Candace had a good question. Are there states, which it sounds like maybe California, that have relative success at fighting back charters? And I would like to add on to that, how do we fight against?
Yeah, well, in the last 3 years, you saw a massive outburst of teacher union protests in the United States. Teachers and teacher unions in probably 6 different states, especially in Virginia, participated in marches, rallies, and protests demanding better arrangements for schools, and specifically targeting charter schools. And this actually, I guess I would say, stayed the hand of the state. Okay, it sort of slowed things down. And it looked like for a while in Virginia that the teachers had prevailed, but a year or 2 later, the legislature did a quick 1-2 punch and sort of undermined the teachers' unions and said, we are going to start approving charter schools in the state of Virginia. So there's a sort of a tit for tat kind of fight that's constantly going on. And really the only way to deal with this, especially in Chicago, there were a lot of strikes against charter schools in Chicago. The Acero charter schools, a big charter school chain in Chicago, saw 500 of their own teachers go on strike. And as a result, the teachers in those schools were able to win some concessions, better pay, better working conditions, a contract, and some other goodies. So the powers that be are not invincible. They do actually lose. They can spend millions and millions of dollars on school board races and state superintendent races and still actually lose. They are not invincible. And they are very concerned about the resistance to charter schools and school privatization. And as small as this group is, they don't want to see groups like this come together and discuss charter schools and develop coherence and consciousness and thinking about how to combat charter schools, because folks are right. There's still a lot of confusion about charter schools among parents, among teachers, among educators. And we need to develop that discussion so people develop the analysis and the coherence for why and how to fight charter schools. And I think that fight is going to intensify and pick up in the coming months and coming years, especially with the election of Biden.
Absolutely. I think also, you know, when we first started the Rochester Organization of Rank and File Educators almost 1 year ago, we're about to have an anniversary, but one of our meetings was with the president of UTLA. And it was so powerful because that union was coming off of their very successful teacher strike, and one of their demands was a moratorium on charter schools. And so we know that it is possible, but I think that we underestimate the role of organized labor in this fight. And we have somebody in the chat who's saying we need to fix internally, we need to fix the problems in the school district before we can ever, you know, talk about or criticize the charter school systems. But I would argue that you cannot fix internally what's happening because of external forces, right? We have constant instability and flux in students and funding. And how are we supposed to stabilize as a district if we're constantly losing those, you know, that's those students and potentially closing schools in our district and programs? Anyone else want to chime in before we move on here?
Yes, in Massachusetts, that's right. They actually blocked the charter school proposition, which was very exciting.
All right. I'm so excited about this. So we, in response to the announcement that the CEO of UPrep was being considered for a board seat, we put together this petition. We currently have about 300 signatures. Obviously, this is still just a small fraction of the stakeholders in the district. And I think that something that everybody can do today is just share this petition with 5 people and maybe talk to them about what we talked about today and encourage them to sign, but also maybe look into the issue further. Like if they have questions, those are I think like Megan referred to earlier, some people don't even know what the difference is between a charter school and a traditional public school in the Rochester City School District. So these are conversations that we need to have because overall, I'd say charter schools have the money and the funding to do their educating, and we need to be able to counteract that messaging and really speak truth to those, you know, things.
So I just ask a quick question about that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if anyone else has had conversations with Van White or any of the other commissioners about if this person intends on leaving his position at the charter school, should he be chosen on the board. I'm just curious if anyone else knows the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm guessing whether he leaves his position or not, it probably won't make that big a difference in terms of his motivation and drive.
Being an RCSD commissioner is not a full-time job, and I very much doubt that he's going to quit his full-time job.
My interest in that is So you cannot be an RCSD employee and work on the board, but they're receiving funds from what would have gone to RCSD. So it's kind of I feel like a gray area.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because when the issue of mayoral control and state control of the RCSD came up, Van White and the unions were staunchly against it. And I actually met with Van White several times to discuss how to fight this. And if we had had mayoral control, if we had had state control, you would have opened the door very widely to charter schools. I think he understands that link. I think he does. I'm not absolutely sure. Maybe not. Okay, Megan's shaking her head. Maybe not.
I do not think he understands, but that's just my opinion.
Well, you could be right. You could be right. But I think if you are the head of a public school district, why would you support something that undermines the public school district unless you've got a stake in the game?
Yeah, I'm a little incredulous. I think he knows. Our next action item here is to write to our board president. So write an email to Van White today and just tell him what you learned. Ask him questions. Ask him what he thinks about the situation with funding. Ask him why he thinks Mr. Larkin is the best person for the open seat. I think everybody should have some information to share today. And actually, I'm going to share with you the presentation also. So please feel free to steal some of the talking points from our slides today and share them with our board president. And I'm going to have Kristen French just speak to this last item because she is our resident expert at speaking at Board of Education meetings.
Yes, I do like to speak, and I found it to be powerful because very often I do get a message back from somebody in some sort of capacity. So on Tuesday, the 17th, there is a board meeting that's at 5:30. And then Wednesday, the 18th, there's a public hearing on that Shelley Jallow is mandated to do by the state. So either one you can sign up for. And when you do, you have to sign up by noon of that day. And you're also welcome to just submit comments. You can do both. So you can just sign up, or you can submit comments, or you can submit your whole speech. So you just have to email that Board of Education at RCSD 1212.org, and then you can sign up. They changed the rules, so you only have 2 minutes. 2 minutes goes very, very, very quick. So when I type my speech, I have to do that, and I practice and I time myself. So I'm able to fit it into 2 minutes because it goes by very quick. So I recommend doing that, making sure you get your 2 minutes. I'm not sure about the public hearing, if it follows the same rules or not. So very often with the hearings, Shelley just reads off slides, and then you get to speak. So I recommend it, and it would be great to do. And a lot of times I'm the only one on the speakers list, or sometimes another person. So if 4, 5, 6, 7 of us can sign up to speak, that will be very powerful.
Absolutely. And I am going to be brave and sign up to read our petition out loud. So I hope we can get some more signatures by Tuesday.
Also, when you sign up to speak, make sure you include your role in the district. If you're a community member or teacher, and also your phone number they like to have in there. And they would much rather hear from parents, and parents get to speak first than a staff member. So definitely encourage your families too to sign up, parents and caregivers.
Absolutely. All right, I think that's all we have for today. And I am so happy that Dr. Tell came here to speak with us. And I am so encouraged by all the support that we had here today. I think that, again, 25 people on a Sunday morning is very exciting. I know I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too. I am going to stay on for a bit. So if you want to stay behind and ask a question privately to myself or someone else who ends up staying on as well, that's totally fine. And thank you all for coming. And I hope that this talk we had today really amplifies the issues that we talked about. So take it to other people, tell them about it. And we will post this video of the discussion today on YouTube, and we're going to put it on Facebook also. And we'll send a link out for that. So thanks, everybody.